Hey, we are here. This weekend we started a Signs of the Times message series where we're taking a look at the end times. And so we wanted to take another opportunity to get together, chat about the weekend, and go beyond the Sunday message. The last time we did this, we were at the beginning of the Bible. We were in Genesis.
That is true.
And this time we are at the end. And so I'm excited about this conversation. We'll be having this conversation after every week of this series, which is 5 weeks long. But today I'm here with Jamie Wamsley, one of our pastors,
Hello,
and
Ellie.
Scott Chapman, our senior pastor. And so let's just dive in. Week one was kind of an introduction.
Yep.
Right? We stepped into the end times. Scott, as you come off of the weekend and look toward this next weekend and this whole series, what are you thinking about? Like, what are you excited about, and where are we going?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be a really good series. This obviously has a lot of interest. Right now, there's a ton of people in our society and in our church that are asking questions about where's the world going and how can I find my place in the midst of this much change, and is there anything that the Bible would say to how we should live in the midst of that uncertainty? And I think we're going to be able to get at some really big ideas and big themes. And going through Matthew 24 and 25, which is the Olivet Discourse, which has been our approach to the series, it's Jesus's words to the answering the question of what does the future look like? And he takes 2 entire chapters of the Bible to do that. And I think that it's the second largest message that we have from Jesus after the Sermon on the Mount. And so it's a huge amount of information that he wants us to know and wants us to be able to interact with around it. And it's also written very differently than the book of Revelation, which is the last book in the Bible, which is a vision and uses visionary or apocalyptic language, where Matthew is using very plain language, and this isn't an attempt to help us to truly understand how to orient ourselves in it. So, yeah, I'm excited about it.
That's awesome. Yeah, you said something this weekend about taking Jesus's words and using those to look at the book of Revelation and all the end times literature instead of kind of reversing it and looking at it the other way. And I thought that was an interesting point.
There's 2 approaches theologically to this. The first is, you can do just that, actually, is you start with John in the book of Revelation, and you have an interpretation of all of the various word pictures that are generated. And then you take that theology and you read it back into the New Testament. Or you can start with Jesus and Paul, frankly, who are giving plain information around the end, and read that into John. And that's the method I prefer, because I think you start with something that can be plainly read to form your understanding, and then bring that into something that is harder to read. And because there's so many different interpretations of John's Revelation. So.
Yeah, and we sit with a lot of different interpretations across our church.
We do.
And even among our teaching team.
We do.
And so I think that even as we looked at prepping for this series, our approach was a little bit different, right? We didn't say, hey, we're going to dissect this, but we asked our congregation for questions.
We did.
And the questions were wild. There was a vast span of what they included. Everything from what will happen to my pets.
Yeah, that was big.
People
that
love
was a
their
huge
pets.
interest. I know.
Which it ranked above marriages, what will happen to my spouse, or what will happen to my kids. People wanted to know what would happen to their pets. But also what does this have to do with Israel right now? How do we know if we're close? What signs have we already seen? And I'm curious, when you guys think about the end times, or if you go back to before you studied the end times, what are the questions that pop into your minds? How are those similar to the questions that our congregations have, or what are the questions that you still hold right now?
Yeah.
It's interesting, for me at least. A lot of times, when I study a subject in Scripture, I'll aggregate all the passages that speak to it and take my time and work through it. And almost all of the time, there's a growing synergy where it becomes really, really clear what the mind of God is on a subject and how to understand it, how we should think about it, how we should live according to it. You look at a lot of the stuff related to the end times, and the more you aggregate it, the more you study it, there's a lot of things that are said there's a lot of things that are not said. And for me, almost every time it evokes more questions than answers it provides. And so to me, it's pretty humbling. But what's challenging is you go out on YouTube or wherever else, and there is no shortage of very prominent, confident,
and sometimes not that prominent.
not sometimes, but very confident Christians
Yeah.
who are going to explain to you exactly what these passages mean. And I actually am, I think the word is kind of stunned by the level of confidence that I think people have around a lot of this. And so to me, this is, it's a very exciting subject. It is a very sobering subject. And it genuinely produces in me real humility because there's a lot I think. There's far less that I know.
Yeah.
And
Do you think that God designed it that way, though?
well, it certainly has caused me to ask the question if God was purposeful in how he did this. I mean, I think there are clearly some things he wants us to know and to stand on, but there's an awful lot he doesn't feel clearly that motivated to spell out for us in great detail.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that before I studied this in some depth, I mean, I think my interest level probably as a younger guy was very much about how can I know what's going to happen, and is there some cool insider information that I can know that would kind of, inform me as to this and give me an insight even into more supernatural dynamics of life in general. Is there something like that where the more I've read this, I realize that's not where Jesus for sure is going in that. And he's attempting to explain larger spiritual realities, but in a way that actually makes practical differences. And he gives us in his two reasons why he's telling the disciples that, so that they're not misled and they're not alarmed. Those are super practical.
Yeah.
Like those are very, very practical things, because he's like, hey, this could get really confusing, and I'd rather you not be confused than confused. And second, it's actually, we're talking about some scary things.
Yeah.
And it'd be pretty easy to let fear get a hold of you. You don't need to do that. And he's setting that up on the front end, and I think that's good.
Yeah, I think he taps right into like human nature, like our desire, our need to know everything. I mean, go back to the garden. We had that from the beginning, right?
Yep.
The need to know everything. And I think that sitting in that place of wanting to know, needing to know to some level, we saw that represented in the questions that we received from people of like, help me have some comfort here, right? But to your point, Scott, what Jesus is saying is like, hey, where are you finding your comfort?
Yeah.
In the fact or in me, right?
Yep.
And I think that you've made an interesting point that the place where Jesus had this conversation even.
Yeah.
Like there are some things that are mysterious that God might be doing here, but the place that he had this conversation with the disciples was likely pretty significant.
I think it's hugely significant. The fact this is happening on the Mount of Olives, which is the exact place where Jesus will return. And so he has built a campfire sitting on the very spot where he's going to return and having the conversation with them about all of this. And I just look at it and I think, how symbolic is it? You're sitting around this campfire with Jesus. It's dark. You're on this mountain with this little valley that's, a few hundred yards away from the city of Jerusalem, the wall and the temple above it. And he's looking there and he's pointing at the temple and he's telling them that that's not going to be present. But what's going to be present is where they are. Right there on the top of the mountain is where he's going to return, and that's what's going to endure and what's going to remain. I just think it's ironic, of all the places that they could be camping, that they're in that very spot. It feels like a foreshadowing in some sense.
That's actually, I think, one of the presents one of the challenges when Christians think about the end times, because there's a ton that Jesus does and says and signals that creates a sense of imminency or soonness about his return. And yet it's been 2,000 years.
Yep.
Right? And we don't know if it's going to be another 2,000 years. And so on the one hand, it seems like from Jesus' perspective, this is something that should be forefront in our minds, that we should be mindful of, that we should live in light of. And on the other hand, all of us ask the question, do we think it's going to happen in our lifetime?
Right.
And that's a hard tension, I think, for most people to hold.
It is. When you think about that, like when you look at the world around you, I know you are a huge student of everything around us and how the world is moving.
It's so good right now.
Yeah,
so
it's
good.
such a good spot. So much peace.
all up and to the right.
All up and to the right. When you look at the world, and you are somebody, you and I have a lot of conversations around that, and that I gain from your perspective. And so when you look at that, what do you see?
Obviously there's a ton of turmoil in the world, and it feels like right now, it feels like it's only increasing, right? And so that's certainly not the first time the world has felt this way, and it probably won't be the last time the world feels this way, but we feel it. You look at all of the indicators in the Bible of what the end is going to feel like. And the first thing I would say is I hold all my thoughts on this loosely because, as I said earlier, there are things I think and there are things I know.
Yeah.
These are things I think. In terms of the end, it doesn't quite feel to me personally like we're approaching the end. But if it were a play or a drama, it feels like the stage is getting set. And so it feels like we're moving in that direction. I don't know how quickly that happens. I don't know the future, and I think most Christian leaders should be quick to say we don't know the future. Yeah. But events could unfold very quickly, or it could be another 100, 200 years. I don't know.
Yeah, one of the things that I remember is when the Berlin Wall came down, and for most of my childhood and adolescence, that seemed so permanent. Like there was the Eastern Bloc and there was the Western NATO and allies, and that just seemed like something that would be there for the next 150 years. And when it happened, it just happened, and it was over so quickly, and the entire map of Europe changed, and the entire fate of the world changed. And I look at that, and it was a lesson to me how fast the world can change. It's just in a blink of an eye.
Yep.
You think you're somewhere, and then you're not. And I think I just look at where we are too, because like I think the amount of political change that has happened in the last 5 years, 8 years, has been massive, not just in America, but around the world. You look at the amount of technological change that we're in the midst of right now, and it is unprecedented. There has never been a season where one generation has had this much technological change in their lifetime. And you look at, I predate cell phones. And so like, there's a reality of where my kids can't even imagine that. They can't imagine not having internet. They can't imagine these things. My grandchildren will grow up and not imagine not having AI and not imagine not being without quantum computing and, bio chips and all kinds of things that will be part of that. And you look at that and we are racing towards a digital society where our entire lives are augmented digitally, that there won't be one element of our life that is unaugmented.
Yeah.
And we went from having almost like this silo in our life of technology that we used, where now we won't have any part of our life untouched by it. And we won't be able to do our economics without it. We won't be able to do our job without it. We won't be able to do relationships without it. We won't be able... And having somebody take that away would be like somebody taking your life away, which we have never been in that space. And I just think that makes people feel different than maybe what it has in the past.
Well, I think it's a potentially terrifying reality because you're talking about aggregating control into a relatively small number of people's hands. The ability for other people to control your access to money, to travel, to food potentially, medicine.
Even your own identity.
Yeah. I mean, that's a sobering thought because obviously there's great potential for good in a lot of these things, but there's a great potential for evil in a lot of those things. And so it is the size of the shift and the speed of the shift is incredibly destabilizing minimally and scary for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think thinking about that and like what you said about the wall and like not imagining life, you know, in that reality and how it changes so quickly. And I think about like, even I predate cell phones. Like I didn't, you know.
No way.
I know.
Come on.
I know. And I'm not going to say if I'm half
But do you
your age
remember
or not,
cigarette
but
machines in bowling alleys, or like
I
how
remember
old
them.
are you?
I do. My grandparents owned a laundromat, and there was a cigarette machine in the laundromat, and so I do remember that. But I think about like if you look back. Every generation almost has had something that's felt that way of like, surely this could be the end. Right. And I think about looking at, 70 AD when the temple fell.
Yeah.
And those people then thinking, surely this must be the end. Like it was the crumbling of their world as they knew it. What Jesus had said was going to take place had taken place.
Yep.
And surely this must be the end. And I think that there's a reality that so many generations, if not all, have lived in the midst of that feeling of like, surely this must be it. And like, if that's the case, there's like this question of what do we do with that feeling and what do we do with that? But I think in looking at the temple, you brought that up this weekend.
Yeah.
And just some of the historical pieces that go into that.
I'm just having visions of that T-shirt, the "Keep Calm and Carry On."
Yeah,
I think the British nailed that one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've been to Rome, right? Mm-hmm. And Ellie, have you?
I have not. I'm not super well traveled.
Okay. Well, I don't know that I am either. But in Rome, one of the most surprising things to me was the Arch of Titus, and I stumbled upon it. I didn't know what it was. And as you're walking near the Colosseum, there's this huge arch that you walk and you see Jewish symbols on it, the menorahs and all of these things. And I don't read Latin, and so I didn't know the inscriptions of it. And I asked someone, and I was shocked to find out that Titus was the person who destroyed Jerusalem, brought all the wealth back, and slaves, Jewish slaves back, and built the Colosseum and built some of the public works, including the large Temple of Peace in Rome. And in some ways, if you were Jewish and lived at 70 AD, that would have been such a horrible, insulting, destabilizing reality to you, that the very temple of the living God was taken down and destroyed and looted, mocked, and it became this secular Colosseum of blood and death. And it's hard to imagine something more evil than the Colosseum being built in its place. And I think when you think about it spiritually, I think that was by design. I think the enemy had a hold of that and had a moment to create so great an evil. Like we when we were in Rome as well, went out into the Colosseum. Did you do that as well?
Yeah.
How did you feel walking into the sand of the Colosseum when you walked into it?
I didn't walk down into it. I'm sorry. We visited the Colosseum. I didn't go.
We did. We actually went in the gladiator entrance and were able to come up out into the sand.
Oh, wow.
And it was such an unnerving feeling even now. Like when you get there, the vibe of that is not excitement, Russell Crowe,
Right. To imagine the people that were.
Yeah.
To imagine this was probably the last walk the
Right.
vast majority of these people ever took.
Right.
And so there was a darkness to that. And I think there's a spiritual dynamic to that's part of that you would have felt absolutely like the world had ended for you.
Yeah, what I think is interesting about your question, Ellie, is like a lot of times when we look backwards historically, like there's a new archaeological dig and they'll find something.
Yep.
They're always finding evidence that actually supports the veracity of Scripture, that makes you realize like, oh, this is actually a credible historical record. This place existed. This person existed.
Yeah.
This actually really happened. All that kind of thing. When you look forward, that question of like, wow, is this the end? Are we heading towards the end? It's actually the same thing in reverse. We've read enough in Scripture that we're looking around and we're saying, oh, that actually feels like that, and that maps to that, and
Right.
And it should actually have the same effect in that it's not a bad thing to wonder if this isn't the end. It's a thing that should make us go, wow, the Bible's actually true.
Right.
Like, this actually is calling out where the world is headed. I can actually put my trust and confidence both in the reality of God and what I read in the Bible. Like, this is all woven together in a way that is beyond coincidence.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah. And I think there's some cool things, like scripturally, that Jesus is always like talking about something in the now, but pointing to something bigger. And I think that he was doing that with the temple as well, right? And there's scriptural pieces that point to that, that we see, right?
Right.
Of like, hey, I'm talking about something literal, but also another thing that I'm doing here.
Totally. What I think is fascinating about that, and we didn't get into this in the message, but there are two conversations that got married together by the disciples. If you remember, they started off talking about the temple.
Yeah.
And isn't this an amazing place? And
Yeah.
Jesus says, yeah, pretty cool, but it's all going to come down.
Right.
And it spurs a conversation later on the Mount of Olives about the end times, because they then marry the destruction of the temple and the end times.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Jesus says a little bit later in this passage is this generation won't pass away until these things come to pass. And there's a lot of ways that you can interpret that. The way I choose to look at it is he's now going back and talking about the temple.
Yeah.
He's not necessarily talking about all the end times things are going to come to pass while this generation walks the earth.
Right.
He's going back to the impetus that began the conversation, and he's saying, hey, remember what we were talking about? That's actually going to happen in your lifetime. And I think that can be confusing to people, because they say, well, why didn't it all happen?
Yeah.
Why didn't the end come? Why didn't Jesus return? These people's lives came and went. And does that make the Bible wrong? And to your point, Jamie, no, it actually makes it right, because he's actually calling out. But the disciples were the ones that married those two concepts. Jesus didn't marry them, but he's interacting in the way they chose to come at it.
Yeah.
And now he's going back and isolating the temple and saying, that's actually going to happen in your lifetime.
Yeah.
But be ready for this.
Yeah.
Live ready for that to happen. But not even, he even says, I don't even know when it's going to happen. Only the Father does. And so the reality is there's two time frames, one for the temple and one for the end, that I think it's important to know that.
Yeah.
If you don't interpret it that way, I think it's a very difficult passage to reconcile. So I think you're 100% right on that. The thing I always think is the disciples listening to Jesus would have had no imagination that 2,000 years would have passed, and Jesus would not have returned. And I don't think Jesus wanted to dispel them of that notion. I think he wanted him to live like his return was imminent, because I think he knew that that's what would be part of fueling the bringing of his kingdom over all the earth. And so even though we don't live with any idea of when his return will happen, I actually think we can understand that the way he wants us to live, and wants us to live in light as if his return was coming in the next year or two.
I could not agree more. He tells us why he's telling them this. He's not attempting to give us a massive chart and a timeline and information and precision to be able to map out and know how long we have and how we can navigate that. In fact, he's choosing not to do any of those things. And what he's doing is attempting to build faith and morality in the people that are there. And he's building it clearly around mission. He is saying, listen, you have a job and a calling as Christians, which is to reach your neighbor, reach your family with this message that I have handed you so that they can have the same life that you have. If you love them at all, go do that. And as you do, remember to be faithful to God and to live like I have lived and to give a witness in that. And that's the entire point that he's doing it. I look at so many teachings on this today with 25-foot long charts and graphs and all of it. And I think even if you're right, which I think is a remote chance, but even if you're right, I don't think that creates what Jesus is looking to create. I think he's looking to help spiritually and morally form a people to be able to live like him underneath all these circumstances without fear of the future. That's where he's trying to go with it.
Yeah. And I think he says, that it is going to be the beginning of the birth pains. And I think that's interesting that he says the beginning
Yeah.
of the birth pains.
As a woman who's had
yeah,
several children.
I have had children.
You're right. I want to ask you this because I think about that analogy a lot.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like you can have birth pangs, and how long did your birth?
Well,
pangs
you had
last?
Braxton Hicks contractions.
Right.
Yes.
And then you had the regular
Which
contractions.
are the fake ones.
But
if you've
Yes.
never given birth.
even the real ones, like
Yeah.
let's say it's a 9-hour period. I'm making this up,
Yeah.
right? Like, how long is that 9 hours really?
So long.
Right.
It's the longest. Yeah. It's like the longest. My first labor was like 18 plus hours. But the way I kind of think about it when he says that, like, this is the beginning of the birth pains. One, he doesn't tell us how long labor is going to last, right? He's not telling
Yeah.
us like, hey, but he does give us a sign of like when labor could be coming to an end, right? And he says like the gospel will be spread to the end of the earth. Like, hey, that's a good sign that maybe this labor's getting close to being over. But when I was thinking about like giving birth, like when you have the birth pains, it's either a sign, depending on where you are in labor, to breathe or to push.
Oh, that's good.
And like sometimes you just have to breathe through the pain.
It is not really overly miraculous that I came up with neither of those.
Yeah.
As a man, it's our job to watch
Yeah.
in horror.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just turn around, right? But we breathe through the pain sometimes because
Yeah.
there's nothing else you can do. Because if you push, it's going to be too soon, right?
Oh, that's good.
But
Ellie, that's really good.
the breathing prepares your body for what's coming next. But then there's certain pains that when you hit them, the nurse is going to look you in the eyes and say, it's time to push.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you push, it's not just one push that gets the job done.
Yeah.
Like, sorry if you've never given birth before and you're like in the process of that, but there's multiple pushes. And I kind of think about that, like as Jesus is setting us up, like, hey, this is going to be the beginning of the birth pains. There's going to be times to breathe and there's going to be times to push. And I think that if we know him, we'll know when those are.
Yeah.
Right. But the point of him saying like, there is one way that you'll know.
Yeah.
Right? That the gospel's being spread to
Totally.
the end of the earth. I'm interested in what you think that means.
So before that, just on
Yeah.
the birth pain thing.
We're still there.
We're still there. Yeah. I remember when my son was born, and I remember the Braxton Hicks contractions because
Yes.
I was not able to fully understand what was happening. And then I remember the real ones. Mm-hmm. And for me, watching Tammy, it was night and day. And I look at this passage, and I think women may not have had the term Braxton Hicks back in Jesus' day, but they knew what that was.
Yeah.
And he's basically saying, hey, all these things that are happening up to this great tribulation are kind of like Braxton Hicks contractions.
Yeah.
World wars, all this really bad, but they're nothing
Yeah.
compared to what's coming. And you'll know that.
That's so true.
And I love what you said in there about breathing and pushing. And I think that we breathe and bring peace into the world up until it's time to push. And I think that is totally key.
Yeah. That's
yeah.
a good point. I love the illustration of the Braxton Hicks because then also once you feel a real one, you know.
Yeah.
Like
Totally.
and so like
Totally.
you will know when the real pains come for sure.
You asked a question on the backside.
Yeah. So he tells us, like, you will know when the gospel spread to the ends
Yes.
of the earth. And how do we hold that? How do we look at it?
That's a different question I was going to answer, but I'll speak
That's
to
fine.
the one in my mind first, if
Yeah.
that's all right. I actually think sometimes we talk about the scariness or the potential for evil with technology, but you go to the flip side of this. I remember when I was in college and they talked about how many unreached peoples group there were and how many people were working on different translations and how long it took to do each translation. How quick do you think AI can generate a translation into a lot quicker than we used to? I don't know the exact answer,
That's a very good
but
point.
it's really, really, really fast.
Yep.
And technology is breaking into groups of people,
Yeah.
distributing it in ways we never imagined possible.
Right.
I don't know how much people have been paying attention to what's happening in Iran right now, but it looks like we could potentially see a shift in leadership in that country imminently. And I'm telling you right now, my perception on that, when this is all said and done and it's all settled, and if there is a shift in leadership, you're going to find that Christianity had a way larger role in this than anybody imagines right now. There are tons of Persians, I believe, that are coming to faith in Jesus underground.
I agree.
Wow.
All the evidence points to that.
That is at the very heart of this. And that isn't possible without technology. And so technology has greatly accelerated the potential for the message to reach the ends of the earth.
I don't know about you, but I have never been anywhere in the world where there's not a cell phone.
Right.
I mean, I have been in parts of India and parts of China and other parts of Asia where they still farm with oxen, and they gather water with buckets, and everybody has a cell phone.
Really?
Absolutely.
I remember visiting remote parts of the earth 20, 30 years ago. It wasn't a cell phone, but it was a satellite dish.
Right.
And people that couldn't afford clean
because
water.
it's so important to
Right.
them to be connected to the world that they're doing that, and I think that is a game changer. I think a couple things about this too. I think one, if you talk to linguists today and you look at the Bible societies that are out there, they would actually make the case that they are very, very close to have either reached or are reaching the very last people groups and language groups that have not been able to hear the gospel in their own language or have a Bible in their own language. Wycliffe and all these guys have been doing enormous translation works. I agree with you about AI. I'm sure that they are already there in doing that. But what's interesting is Jesus qualifies it, and he says the gospel of my kingdom. And I think that is super important. One of the biggest changes our church made 15 years ago was to shift from what we call the soterian gospel to a full kingdom gospel. And that was an enormous change for us. And at the time, not very many people were doing that.
Yeah.
It was a biblical conviction for us. And if you don't know the difference between that, a soterian gospel would be something like this. It would tell you how to become a Christian. Jesus died on the cross for my sins, and if I believe in him as my Lord and my Savior, I'll go to heaven when I die. That's essentially the soterian gospel. But we realize that's not the gospel that Jesus shared. And we realize that's part of that gospel, but the fullness of the gospel that Jesus shared was that the kingdom of God is breaking into the earth, and it's near enough to be able to reach out and to grab.
Yeah.
And the idea is that Jesus' kingdom will come upon the entire earth and it will fill the earth, but even right now it can fill us in our hearing and allow the kingdom of God to come into us, save us in that sense, but do more than that, transform us, lead us, guide us, empower us into a different life. And frankly, though, it's to build a different world. The vast majority of Christians are shocked to find out that God's ultimate desire for Christianity is not an evacuation plan, but it's to transform the world through the lives of his people empowered by him. And so Jesus qualifies it very clearly. And so I think that there has been gospel messages that have gone throughout the world. I also wonder, the kingdom gospel has gained so much traction in so many countries and in so many denominations in the past decade that it is quickly gaining tons of ground. And there's been a lot of people who have sown into that, and we've been one of them that has sown into that. And I think that is also an important dynamic, because when you talk about end times, if you believe the ultimate plan of God is an evacuation plan into an ethereal realm called heaven, and you think that's the end game, this makes no sense to you.
Right.
If you believe that God is looking to change the world, to make it where his will is done on earth as it is in heaven, this makes perfect sense. And you can see why it's so important that an end times theology is part of the gospel, not just part of your Christianity.
Yeah.
This is the gospel. It's not tacked onto the gospel. And so the end times for Jesus is the completion of what he started.
Yeah.
Which is a so much bigger thing.
Yeah. And I think the point of God always wanted to do that with us.
Yep.
Right. And so why would he do it without us? He's going to come and finish the job for sure.
Right.
We know that. But there's a point that he's always wanted to do it with us. And so he's going to give us every chance possible to do that.
Totally.
But it said, I looked up real quick, the gospel, parts of the Bible and the gospel have been translated into 3,000 of the 7,000 world languages. So
wow.
AI might speed us up to get there, I think.
Should take about a day and a half, I think.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing, though, that there are 7,000 languages currently spoken in the world?
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's a lot of languages.
Yeah. And at the same time, I feel are there more?
There could be more
that we don't know, but
there could be more.
It just feels okay, that's a lot of languages. And
there's some language that are spoken after football games that I'm sure are not in there as well.
Yeah, some of us know those well. But I think something interesting that happened this week, Scott, you talked about this concept, right? The gospel being spread to the ends of the earth. And we left the question button open on the website for people to keep submitting questions. And we got multiple questions
Awesome.
that were the same. And it was, how do we know we're close to that?
Yeah.
Or like, how will we know? And I think, like, what do you feel like that says about like our humanness? And our desire to know, and what do we do with that?
Yeah, it's funny. I was having a conversation with one of my sons the other day, and he was asking a similar question. It was more about the Antichrist, and he said how he was really concerned that he wouldn't be able to recognize the Antichrist and that he would be deceived. And I don't know, obviously, but I have the strong sense it's just not going to be that hard. When it comes, you're gonna know it. We've joked about this in the past. There was an old Saturday Night Live clip where John Lubbock was playing the devil in the People's Court.
Yeah.
And there was some question as to whether he was Lucifer
He was
or
angry.
whatever.
I think that he was angry or malevolent toward this person or not.
Yeah. And they were accusing him of, toilet papering the lawn
Yes.
or something like that. And he was like, listen, lady, I'm Beelzebub, the prince of darkness. When I start tormenting you, you're going to know it.
Yeah.
Right? And I just think for those that are paying attention, for those that are faithfully following God, for those that really are doing their best to understand what is happening around them, it's just not going to be that hard to discern between those who are devoted to Jesus and want to elevate him, and those who are, frankly, devoted to themselves or to other things. That's not a hard distinction to make, and so I don't think we should have a lot of fear around that. And when the end times come, I think it's going to be the same thing. I just think it's going to be pretty self-evident.
Yeah, I'm always interested. I think there's a couple. I always ask the question, what's the question behind the question? I've found after doing ministry a little while that you often are more profited by attempting to get the person to tell you more about themselves and what's happening inside them than even just answering the intellectual inquiry. And I think sometimes it's as simple as curiosity. Like, man, we want to know. We're a curious people. We want to know. I think it's also there's a sense of, I think what you said of just, am I going to miss it? Am I going to find myself in trouble? And there's an insecurity and a fear. I also think in a subtle way, it can be a desire to have control.
Yeah.
And by that, I don't mean be controlling of others, but to have some measure of control in our own hands, to say, I know today is going to be okay because I know the plan. And here's the plan of God, and I know the plan, and so I know when it's going to happen and how it's going to happen, and therefore I have some control on how I make my choices. Where Jesus actually isn't giving us that. He's not giving us a plan. He's giving us a person.
Yeah.
And he's like, I need you to trust me. And at the end of the day, if you trust me, you don't need a plan. You don't need a chart. You don't need a timeline. You don't need to know. You need to know me. And I think what's interesting is the very God of Israel who freed them from Egypt, who met with them in the temple, showed up as a baby boy in Bethlehem. And it's amazing who had no trouble recognizing him and who had a massive amount of trouble recognizing him. If you allow our own, I should say, if we allow our own preconceptions of religion or our own position and our wants and our needs to get in front of Jesus, he's very hard to see.
Yeah.
And he's even harder to accept. When we become invested in an outcome or invested in a lifestyle or invested in something, it's very hard for us to see Jesus. But when we're invested in Jesus, he's actually not that hard to see. And crowds of people,
That's really well said,
flocked around him and were able to see what the religious leaders of the day could not see.
Yeah. That's such a good point. And I think it makes it, if we keep our focus on him, right, it makes us easier to do the two things that he said.
Totally.
Right? Don't be alarmed. Don't be misled. Like, if we know him.
Totally. And you and I were talking earlier today, Ellie, and one of the things that I shared with you was when I read the end times, one of the things I feel is small. I feel very small. I feel very powerless. I feel very unable to bring the end out where I would want it to be. And realizing the level of dependence on God is actually so much more necessary than at any moments I normally think it is. I need Jesus every single breath I take. I need Jesus in every area of my life. I need Jesus to frankly make it till tomorrow. And I think there's times that the world pulls a veil over our eyes and gives us a sense that we're more secure than we are.
Yeah.
Everything's more certain than it is.
Right.
And the reality is the only thing that's really certain is Jesus.
Yeah.
And we need to hang on to him with abandon and not worry about the rest.
Yeah.
I 100% agree with that. I think about John writing Revelation, and as you said at the beginning, Scott, it's his vision, right? But it's really two visions. He had a vision of the world as it was apart from God, and he had a vision of the world under the unchallenged reign of God.
Yep.
And it led to the very last second, the second to last sentence in Scripture, right?
Yep.
Which is, "Come quickly, Lord Jesus." Which,
Amen.
anytime I think about the end times, is I think the most appropriate prayer you can pray. Come quickly, Lord Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah. Can we switch topics to
Yeah.
something else that might make us feel small?
Sure.
You talked about UFOs this weekend.
I did, didn't I? And that was fun. Wasn't that not fun?
It was fun.
You can't come to church every week and hear about UFOs.
You can't.
I want to tell you.
And so I think we just need to give the people what they want and talk about UFOs a little bit.
Let's get
but
our
that's-
tinfoil hats.
Yeah,
and-
that's
and
not
let's
my
do it.
realm of expertise. So, although I have seen all the X-Files.
There you go. So you might know.
Yeah. But so you talked about UFOs, and you pointed us back to Ezekiel
Yep.
in that. Tell us more about it.
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. One, I think at this point in time, it is you literally have the United States military telling you that there are entities or machinery that they cannot
Testifying before Congress.
Testifying
not just
before
telling
Congress,
you,
yeah.
but testifying before
testifying
Congress.
before Congress.
Yeah.
That there are appearances of things that they do not believe they can protect United States battle carrier groups from. And so that in and of itself, that's the whole point that Congress was interviewing them about. And these are veteran fighter pilots, that have had war experience and are some of our very best military men. These are people whose credibility, if they said they saw, an enemy vessel, their credibility would be unquestioned. And we would, as a nation, act on their opinion. And so you look at that, and I think there's no doubt that that's true. The question that comes in is, what are they? And is this new or is this not new? And so where I would differ with a lot of popular opinion is I still think through and work through a biblical worldview versus a scientific secular worldview. If you have a scientific secular worldview, these are aliens from another planet who have warped here with super light speed or some such thing. My view would be, no, we know what this is because the Bible has clearly had multiple opportunities for us to see them. We call them angels or demons or principalities.
What
Go
I
ahead.
think is fun is that you'll notice the shift in language among people that are talking about this, right? And it used to be that they would be referred to as extraterrestrial, right? Alien. And they've shifted, the language has shifted to intradimensional.
Yes.
And
didn't know that.
that's a fascinating turn of the
It
phrase.
is.
Yeah.
And what I think for Christians, a lot of times, I think we sometimes imagine the angelic realm is entirely spiritual, ethereal beings. Like if you met one, you could stick your hand right through them, that they're not
Exactly.
corporal, which is not how the Bible presents
right.
them.
Right.
That's
and
right.
so when you talk about them utilizing some type of equipment or machinery, that's not outside of a biblical worldview at all.
Right.
Right.
And there's a physical element to them.
100%.
Yeah.
And like when you look at the angelic encounters that happen in both the Old and the New Testament, this is a physical reality. This
Yeah.
is not just a ghostly apparition
Right.
that has appeared. In addition to that, they exert physical force on physical objects.
Right.
And so
That's a comfortable thought.
Isn't it though? Isn't it though? And so the reality of it is, and we're told that there are entities called seraphs that if you look at the biblical description and the word, they're dragons. Mm-hmm. They're not humanoid. The beasts, the sentient beasts in Ezekiel are not human. Mm-hmm. And you are realizing you were talking about non-human extraterrestrial species, civilizations, frankly,
right.
of angels that most likely, from if you can interpret the Bible, outnumber humans. Like if you
we
look
know
at,
there's a lot of them.
we know there's a whole lot of them, and myriads upon myriads.
Yes.
And so when you look at that, you also realize when there are chariots that are talked about, flaming chariots, flaming swords. You are talking about the ability to kill 185,000 Assyrians in one night. You are talking about the wheels within wheels that are turning in front of Ezekiel, and he's looking at it. So to imagine that there's no technology in these civilizations, they're described by ancient people in ancient terms in the technology of their day.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the slightest imagination that a flaming chariot was simply pulled by horses and was on fire.
Right.
I think that is
That's a really good
description of something else. But what it also doesn't mean is that these are people from another planet. Mm-hmm. I think your point is well taken. We know, or at least we think we know, that there's at least 11 dimensions in the universe. The atom smashers and stuff, the studies around have told us that.
Yep.
When you look at that, if there are beings that even exist in a fourth dimension, they can exist fully in these three and are fully present with us, and you would see them as a solid object, but can accomplish things spatially and in time that we would not.
That are incomprehensible.
That are incomprehensible to us, that often gets the label spiritual. And so I would simply argue that spiritual is attempting to describe something that is more physical but more than, versus non-physical.
And acting in perfect accordance with the universe as it was created.
Exactly. Yeah. And they are created beings acting in accordance to their world the way we are created beings acting in accordance to ours. And they have to bow the knee to the Lord in the same way that we do. And so it's something that we know is true. I also think if you were to tell a great lie that would turn people away from Jesus, which we know is going to be told at the end times, what lies would you tell? And I don't know, but I think possibly one of them would be if you say, hey, we have knowledge that there are extraterrestrial civilizations and that there is no God. And this is a different experience. And I think that would be a lie that would turn millions of people away. And I think we have to be,
or even to lead, not just turn them away, lead them to worship someone.
Lead them into
other
worship
than God.
someone else. And I look at that and I think we have to be not misled according to Jesus, and we have to understand that these realities are not foreign to Scripture, foreign to people of faith, and that we have to be able to understand them within a biblical understanding and not necessarily within a secular one. And I think that makes a huge difference. Now, again, I think this is where lots of people have lots of ideas, and there's tons of speculation, and it's still very hard to have this conversation. It's very difficult to have it without people thinking, "Man, this is you have crossed into the
You're
ridiculous."
a little crazy.
Well, even though, and this is what is fun for me, and I enjoy reading articles and books about this kind of stuff just because I think it's fun. Even if you stop short of drawing conclusions, which I think is really sometimes a really good thing to do, if you just look at what has been observed and the questions they're wrestling with,
right,
they're pretty wild questions.
Yes.
And it's interesting. And it gives me a lot of comfort, honestly, to know that the answer potentially could be,
right,
that it's simply the angelic realm.
Well, I would also argue this as a last point in that if the idea of an extraterrestrial civilization angelically is too difficult scientifically for you to believe, what the Bible says about them will be even harder for you to believe.
Yeah.
Because what the Bible tells you are stories that are far more fantastic than the stories that we are hearing from any of our contemporaries. And the Bible is not attempting to tell you a legend or a myth, but it's attempting to tell you the story of real people encountering something that was way beyond themselves.
Right.
And I think what the faith that we have in Jesus, the faith that we have in Scripture, leads us to say there's more than ourselves.
And I think C.S. Lewis
He did.
Often postulated like
He did.
You look at the size of the universe. How crazy is it to assume that there are other civilizations, other races,
Yeah.
honestly, if heaven looks like the Star Wars bar, I think that'd be kind of fun, you know, a little bit. And so, who knows?
Star Wars bar meets the Shire. And I'm
Right,
there.
totally. There you go.
There you
That's
go.
perfect.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I do think that a lot of times we treat it like there is so much mystery in it, and there is. Like,
Right.
there's no denying that. But he also pretty plainly like lays it out for us biblically.
Yes.
If you look for it.
That
Right?
I think so. I think it is hard to accept, not hard to read.
Yeah.
And I think it challenges our view of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And we struggle to let go of our view of the world and adopt a bigger world. I mean, if you had never been outside of your city your entire life and you had heard all these stories but had never been, and then you went to a large city, it would so change your view of how you had understood everything around you. And we're learning that humans aren't the only sentient life form. The Bible tells us that.
Right.
And that is a reality. And we might not even be the most powerful or the smartest. I know that could be horribly shocking. But
I don't think I'd be shocked if we were not the smartest.
Fair point.
One might hope
Fair
that they're
point.
smarter.
Yep.
There's other people somewhere right now. No.
Yes.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about. That'd be an interesting deep dive.
Yeah.
I think to do. So as we take this intro this week, I feel like we dipped our toes in the water this week. You laid out a lot for people to take away, to ponder, to reflect on throughout the week. But as we head into these next 4 weeks, where are we going?
Yeah, we have just stepped our toe in the water. This week is going to be maybe the hardest week emotionally of the entire journey, and we're gonna actually talk about how history leads up to Jesus's coming and the great tribulation and the difficulties that will come, and the importance of hanging on to your faith. And that's emotion. It's going to be emotionally hard, but unbelievably important. It is. I think it's the emotional heart of Jesus's message. Well, then from there we'll talk about the return of Christ, and we'll talk about where ultimately the world goes and what it looks like and how we can navigate all of those things. And there's just so much. At every point, we also have developed tons of different theologies.
Yeah.
And our people have heard many of them. And so we're going to try to unpack some of those and be able to try to help people navigate that. I want to be super humble and be able to just say, hey, we're not definitively coming to you, and feel free to disagree with us. Feel free to say, hey, I don't think that's true. I go a different direction, and that's totally acceptable. But we're doing our very best. And what's interesting is even within our teaching team, there's not 100% agreement on our theology of the end times.
Yeah.
On the major points there are, but I would say, and how do we get there? And there are 3 different theories on the millennium. There are 3 different theories on the rapture. There are 3 different theories on the abomination of desolation, and all of them wrap into this. And you can find yourself in one of 9 places, really fast just on those issues, let alone the smaller issues in terms of how you navigate them. And so the challenge of it, I think, you need to have some humility, but we're going to present choices, but also some cohesion in that.
Yeah.
And be able, I think, boldly to say, hey, there are some options we're just going to tell you we believe are better than others.
Yeah.
And we might not give you one, like this is the one way, but hey, these 2 over these others may be better ways of thinking about this than others. And that's going to be a challenge too. And so I'm looking forward to that.
This is kind of where we started, but you had referenced Jesus being born as a baby. How many prophecies in the Old Testament are there about the birth of Christ?
Oh, man.
Hundreds?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And there's part of us that asks the question, how could you have not seen this coming? You studied the Bible so diligently. How could you have not seen this, right? I think there's a passage in the New Testament somewhere, I'm forgetting where, but it talks about how God purposely veiled it so that the enemy wouldn't know his plan. And it's not the biggest leap in the world to think there's aspects of his second coming that,
Right.
that God is veiling for whatever reason he has in that. And so I don't know that, as you said earlier, we're intended to solve the mystery of that or to reconcile
Totally.
all the challenges of those different positions. It's good to be aware of them,
Totally.
but I don't know that we can do that.
I would agree.
So if we're not solving the mystery,
Yeah.
if we're not going to come out at the end with all the questions answered, what's your hope for our church in this series?
Yeah, I think it's Jesus' hope. I want to help us. While we can't have a precise map and understanding, we can know enough to not be misled.
Yeah.
And we can know enough on how to keep our feet under us. And we also can know enough to not be alarmed, which are the two things that Jesus said.
Yeah.
He basically said, hey, look, this is really complex and complicated, and it's pretty easy to get turned around and misled in it if you're not careful. And second, it's pretty scary stuff, and it's unnerving because everything you think you know is going away, and everything that you don't know anything about is coming. But you don't have to be scared. And it is the ability to put Jesus strongly at the center of that. And that, go ahead. I
was just going to say, there's a passage in Ephesians. It's the first part of the armor of God passage in Ephesians 6 that I've always loved, where it says, do your best to take your stand against the devil's schemes. And after you've done everything, just stand.
Yeah.
And I hope that when we get to the end of this series, that literally come hell or high water, whatever comes down the road, we have a church that's going to be able to just stand through it all and not waver.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think, Scott, you said it well this weekend. You said, our reality is that the world as we know it will pass away. We know that to be true. Our hope is in a kingdom that cannot be shaken.
Yeah.
We know that to be true. And our invitation is to live with the kingdom in mind now. And I think that it painted this beautiful picture of like, we see a future coming and we know the king who will reign. And the coolest part about Jesus is that he can be king of our life right now.
Exactly.
He's going to come and he's going to rule the world and it's going to be awesome. But right now, today, he can be king of our life. And I think that the way you set that table for us to just hold that throughout the series was really beautiful.
Yeah.
And so I think that's my hope for our church as well. But we've been chatting for like an hour or more.
Wow.
So I know
that went quickly.
It did go very fast. But we'll be back with this podcast every week following this series, and we will look forward to continuing the conversation this Sunday and then afterwards. And we also have resources available at chapel.org/endtimes. That's where you can find parent guides, links to charts maybe that we use on the weekend, and other things. So look there throughout the series, and we'll be back next week.